I'm Alina, 31 years old, a small bakery owner in Vermont. I've spent most of my life perfecting recipes passed down by my grandmother, quietly building something of my own while my family poured everything into my younger brother, Ethan. When I graduated top of my class in culinary school, they barely noticed. But when Ethan dropped out of his third business venture, they threw him a party to cheer him up. I used to think love was earned. Now I know some families only love who they can control. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe if you believe respect should never come with conditions. The phone rang just after 6 a.m., jolting me awake from a dream I couldn't quite remember. I sat up in bed, the Vermont winter light barely peeking through the curtains, and reached for my phone on the nightstand. The caller ID read, "Mom." My stomach tightened. Calls from my parents at this hour were rare and rarely good. I answered, voice groggy. "Hello, Alina?" My mother's tone was clipped, urgent. "It's Ethan. He's in trouble again." I sighed, rubbing my eyes. "Of course, Ethan. What now?" There was a pause, then the sound of my father's voice in the background, low and commanding, as if dictating her words. My mother continued. "His restaurant partnership fell through. He needs money to cover the lease until he can find investors." I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Snowflakes drifted past the window, peaceful and steady, the opposite of what I felt inside. "And this involves me how? You have savings, don't you?" My mother asked it like it was obvious, like my money was theirs to redistribute at will. "You've been doing well with the bakery." You thought I'd bail him out?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. "Alina." My father's voice thundered now, taking the phone. "Family comes first. Your brother needs you." I laughed, but it was bitter. Family comes first? When has that ever applied to me? A silence hung heavy across the line. I could hear my father's breathing, slow and annoyed, the way it always got when I dared to push back. Finally, he said, "Don't be selfish. Ethan is trying. He just needs another chance. Another chance." The phrase that had become my brother's birthright. I closed my eyes. I have a bakery to run. I can't drain my savings every time Ethan fails. "I won't." The silence this time was colder. Then my father spat out the words that would sit with me for days. "Fine. If you won't help your own brother, don't bother coming around here anymore. You've made your choice." He hung up. I sat frozen, phone still pressed to my ear as the dial tone hummed. My heart thudded, slow and painful against my ribs. They'd made their choice years ago, but hearing it out loud, like a sentence handed down, was something else entirely. I got up, pulled on my robe, and shuffled into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the batch of rolls I'd baked the night before. My cat, Miso, wound around my ankles, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. I poured myself coffee, black and strong, and sat at the small oak table I'd refinished myself when I first opened the bakery. My hands shook as I lifted the mug. They chose him, again. But this time, they'd chosen him over me, explicitly, without hesitation. And suddenly, the silence of my kitchen felt suffocating. I tried to push it aside as I prepared for the day. The bakery needed me. The ovens wouldn't wait for heartbreak. By 7:30 I was there, apron tied, flour dusting my arms. The familiar rhythm of kneading dough, shaping loaves, arranging pastries. It usually grounded me. But today every motion felt heavy, my parents' words echoing with every turn of my wrist. "Don't be selfish. Family comes first. Don't bother coming around anymore." The regular customers came and went, unaware of the war inside me. Mrs. Daniels, the retired teacher, picked up her sourdough. The college kids ordered their croissants and lattes. Life went on, as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. By the afternoon, Naomi stopped by. My best friend since culinary school, she had a way of reading me like an open book. "You look like hell," she said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Good afternoon to you too," I muttered. Wiping flour off my cheek, she leaned forward. "What happened?" I hesitated, then told her about the call. Every word felt heavier, spoken aloud, like I was finally admitting how deeply it cut. When I finished, Naomi sat back, her lips pressed into a thin line. "So let me get this straight. Ethan screws up again, and instead of holding him accountable, they demand you fix it? I nodded. And when you said no, they disowned you? The word hung between us. Disowned. I hadn't dared think it, but that's what it was. Naomi shook her head. Alina, I love you, but why are you surprised? They've been choosing him since you were kids. I know, I whispered. But it feels different now, final. Naomi's gaze softened. Maybe final is what you need. Her words lodged deep, unsettling. Could I really live without my parents? Without the hope, tiny, foolish, that one day they'd see me? I didn't answer. I just busied myself with wiping the counter, blinking back tears. That night, alone in my apartment above the bakery, I replayed the conversation 100 times. My father's dismissive tone. My mother's quiet compliance. The ultimatum. I thought about all the times before. When Ethan crashed my car at 17, and they blamed me for lending it to him. When I got into culinary school on scholarship and they skipped my orientation to attend his high school basketball game. When I bought this bakery with years of savings, and they didn't even come to the grand opening because Ethan was going through a rough patch. The pattern was clear. It had always been clear. But I'd clung to the fantasy that one day, something would change. Now I knew better. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. If they had chosen Ethan, then I would choose myself. No more bending. No more apologizing. No more waiting for their love like crumbs from a table. I didn't know what that would look like yet. But as I walked into the bakery, the scent of fresh bread filling the air, I felt something I hadn't in years. Resolve, and maybe, just maybe, that was the start of everything. Ethan was born when I was 6. I remember holding him in the hospital, tiny, red-faced, crying, and thinking he looked like a wrinkled tomato. But everyone around me cooed and laughed like he was some gift from heaven. Isn't he perfect? Mom had whispered, her eyes glowing. I didn't know then that it wasn't just baby love. It was prophecy. From that day forward, Ethan could do no wrong, and I could do no right. At first, it was small things. If he threw a tantrum and broke something, he's just a baby. If I asked for help with my homework, can't you see Ethan needs attention? If I aced a spelling test, I got a nod. If he drew a crooked sun with 4 legs, it went on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a crown. I learned to stay quiet, to stop trying so hard, because it didn't matter what I did. I would always be second. Ethan was the prince and I was the handmaiden. The favoritism deepened with time. When Ethan turned 10, Dad bought him a mini drum set even though we lived in a tiny house with thin walls and cranky neighbors. When I turned 10, I got a journal from the dollar store, the kind with a fake lock that opens with any paperclip. You love writing, don't you? Mom had said, as if that made up for everything. I did love writing. It was my only refuge. I would fill those pages with thoughts I couldn't say out loud. Today, Ethan poured juice on my painting. Mom laughed. Ethan got to go to soccer camp. I had to stay and watch Grandma. They forgot my school play again. The older we got, the louder the difference became. Ethan was loud, impulsive, messy. I was quiet, responsible, neat. But they praised his energy. He's a natural leader, Dad said. He's got charm, Mom added. Meanwhile, I cooked dinner, washed dishes, helped Ethan with homework, and nobody noticed. Or worse, they acted like it was expected. You're the big sister. He looks up to you, Mom would say. Be patient with him. Patient. I grew up learning patience like it was a religion. I watched Ethan fail upward, while I worked silently in his shadow. He wrecked the family car at 16. They bought him another. I earned a scholarship for culinary school. They suggested I defer and stay home to help with bills. I didn't defer. I left. Leaving for school was the first real act of rebellion I ever pulled. I took a bus with 1 suitcase and cried half the way there, not because I missed home, but because I felt like I was abandoning someone who never even claimed me. My parents didn't even drop me off. They said it was too far and they had work. Meanwhile, when Ethan applied to a business incubator across the country, Dad drove him there himself. Paid for a hotel, gave him a credit card. He failed within 6 months, moved back in, started another project. Failed again, moved in with a friend, then came back again. but every time the welcome mat was out. "He's trying," Mom would say. "Not everyone's path is straight. Mine was. Straight, uphill, and lonely." While Ethan flopped and flailed, I worked 2 jobs, graduated with honors, and started my bakery. No help, no loans, no interest from anyone at home. I invited them to my grand opening. No one came. When I called, Mom said, "Oh, honey, we were exhausted from Ethan's move. We'll come next time." They never did. Then Ethan got engaged to a girl named Brittany who spoke like she was always bored and used the word literally in every sentence. I met her once. She looked me up and down like I was furniture. "I didn't know you had a sister," she told Ethan right in front of me. Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, she bakes stuff." That was my introduction. Their wedding was a grand affair. White orchids, imported wine, some influencer DJ. My parents paid for all of it, even flew in relatives from Canada and Ireland. I was placed at the far table, next to the kids and divorced aunties. My bakery was never mentioned. That was the day I realized it didn't matter what I did. In their eyes, I was just there. Background noise. A polite shadow. When I got married a year later, in a modest backyard ceremony, surrounded by a few close friends and my husband's warm, messy, loving family, my parents didn't come. They said they had booked a vacation to Maui and couldn't reschedule. They posted sunset pictures the same day I said my vows. Ethan commented, "Jealous of this trip." I didn't respond. It was one thing to be ignored. It was another to be erased. I told myself I was done expecting anything from them. But you don't stop being a daughter just because you stop being seen. You still wonder, hope, ache. You still hear their voices in your head every time something good or bad happens. Would they care? Would they be proud? It's a curse to love people who can't love you back in the way you need. Then, one day, the phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was tight. "Ethan's in trouble." That was the call that started everything. That's when I knew. They only remembered me when they needed something. And this time, I wasn't going to be so easy to reach. The call from my mother played in my head for hours after she hung up. "Ethan's in trouble." That was all she said at first. No apology, no warm hello, no acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken in almost a year. Just a demand wrapped in concern. A concern that hadn't existed when I begged them to attend my wedding. A concern that only surfaced when their golden child was bleeding. "What kind of trouble?" I had asked, my voice flat. She hesitated. "Business, legal. Something about misusing investor funds. It's not entirely clear, but it's serious. Why are you calling me?" Her silence screamed louder than words. She knew why. She just didn't want to say it. I was the reliable one, the daughter who never asked for anything, the one who kept moving forward, quietly, gracefully, while their son stumbled through life like a drunk bull in a china shop. "Your father thought maybe you could talk to him," she finally said. "He won't listen to us." I exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around my phone. "So let me get this straight. He committed fraud or something close to it, and your idea of a solution is me." "We're not saying you should fix it," she replied too quickly. "Just help. You always know what to do." "You're level-headed," I could have laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I realized in that moment how utterly predictable it was. I was the spare tire, the emergency brake, the daughter they didn't claim until the house was on fire. "I'm not a cleanup crew, Mom." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, the mask slipping. "This is family." The irony struck like a knife. Family. That word had been a one-way street my whole life. A leash when they wanted loyalty, a badge when they needed something, but never a shelter for me. Still, something deep in my gut twisted with old reflexes. The child in me, desperate for approval, wanted to run to their side and solve everything. But the woman I'd become, the one who built herself from scraps and silence, she said no. I didn't go see Ethan. I didn't return their texts. I went to work, baked 3 dozen cinnamon rolls, and played Billie Holiday on repeat. And for the first time, my silence was not weakness. It was power. 3 days later, Dad showed up at my bakery. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked older, slumped shoulders, grayer hair, a tiredness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. He stood in front of the glass display like a lost customer. "I'll have a blueberry muffin," he said. I folded my arms across my apron. "You came for muffins?" He met my gaze. "No." We stared at each other, years of unspoken things crowding the air between us. "I'm not sure I ever told you this," he began, his voice low. "But I always knew you'd be okay." I blinked. "What does that even mean?" "It means I didn't worry about you. You handled things, got things done. So you rewarded that by pretending I didn't exist." His jaw clenched. "That's not fair, isn't it?" He looked down. "Ethan's not like you. He's struggling. He made mistakes. But he's not a bad person." "And I am?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "No," he said quickly. "No, of course not. You've been exceptional, always. We should have shown it more. I see that now. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was regret without responsibility." "You want me to talk to Ethan?" I said flatly. He nodded. I sighed. "I'll think about it." He left without his muffin. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and stared at the stars. I thought about my childhood, the quiet ache of being invisible. I thought about every time I clapped for Ethan while he was booed off a stage, and every time I got an A while they barely glanced up. I thought about justice, not in the legal sense, but in the emotional one. The justice of finally being heard, finally being seen. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Ethan was there, sprawled on the couch in sweatpants, surrounded by takeout boxes and legal papers. He looked thinner. His eyes were shadowed. He looked up when I walked in. "You actually came," he muttered. "You sound disappointed." He shrugged. "They said you might come save the day." "I'm not here to save you, Ethan." His face twisted. "Figures. You always hated me." I tilted my head. "I didn't hate you. I hated how they treated us. I hated that you never noticed." He didn't respond. I sat down on the edge of the armchair. "Tell me what happened." He hesitated, then began to unravel the mess. His failed app launch, the investor money he redirected without consent, the looming lawsuit. He kept saying it wasn't really fraud, just a misunderstanding, but the facts said otherwise. When he finished, he looked at me with the eyes of a drowning man. "What do I do?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. "You tell the truth," I finally said. "You take responsibility. You stop acting like the world owes you safety just because Mom and Dad always gave it." His mouth tightened. "Easy for you to say." "No," I said. "It's not. But it's what I had to learn. Alone." He looked away. "I don't want to go to jail. Then get a lawyer. A real one. Not some friend of a friend." He nodded slowly. Will you help me? Just talk to the investors. They trust you." I stared at him for a long time. "No," I said gently. "This is yours to clean up." "Not mine. He didn't fight me." Maybe he finally understood. I stood to leave. "Tell Mom and Dad I said hi." Outside, the air was sharp with fall. The leaves crunched beneath my boots like brittle memories, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten child. I felt like the grown woman I had become, and no one else had made me. I stood there in the hospital corridor, arms stiff at my sides, the smell of antiseptic making me feel more nauseous than the guilt that shouldn't have even been mine. Ethan was in a hospital bed down the hall, high on pain meds after a freak accident that had apparently involved some unpaid debts and very persuasive men. My parents sat beside him like guardians at a shrine. Mom dabbed at his forehead with a cold cloth while Dad spoke in hushed tones to a man in a gray suit who I assumed was a lawyer. I had shown up because I thought I needed closure. What I got was confirmation. They didn't even acknowledge me at first. I had driven 3 hours straight from the bakery, still wearing flour-dusted jeans and a smudge of icing on my collar. I stood in the doorway like a ghost, waiting. When Mom finally turned and saw me, her mouth tightened into something that almost looked like gratitude. But not quite. "You came," she said. Not a question, not warmth, just an observation, as if I were a plumber or a pizza delivery girl. "I did," I replied, stepping inside. Ethan lifted his head weakly. "Alina, I nodded. Hey. I waited for Dad to say something. Anything. But all I got was a nod and a glance, the kind you give a cashier after grabbing your receipt. The conversation that followed was barely that. Mom explained what had happened. Ethan had borrowed money to start a new crypto venture and things went south. There were threats, an incident, broken ribs, a shattered jaw, a mess. But he's alive, she said, her voice trembling. That's what matters. He's lucky, I replied softly. She nodded, but then looked at me, really looked, and said, he could use your help. The air in the room shifted. My help? Yes, well, he needs somewhere quiet to recover. The house has too many stairs, and your father's back isn't what it used to be. You live alone. Your bakery apartment has that little guest room, right? I almost laughed. You want me to house him? I asked, staring between her and Dad. Dad cleared his throat. It would only be temporary. A few weeks, until he's strong enough. You're asking me to take in the same person who told his friends I was dead weight? The one who embezzled from my first bakery? The one who didn't even text when Grandma died? He's family, Mom whispered, as if that canceled everything. No, I said, standing taller. Family doesn't mean I keep bleeding so he can stay warm. She flinched. Ethan, still woozy, muttered, Alina, come on. Please. I shook my head. I came to make sure you were alive. I did that. But I'm not a doormat anymore. I'm done being useful only when everything else falls apart. Dad looked up then, eyes narrowed. You're being dramatic. And that was it. That sentence, that tone, cracked something in me wide open. I see, I said. So Ethan risking your retirement money on NFTs and losing it all. Not dramatic. Him faking success while stealing from your business partners. Not dramatic. But me refusing to play nursemaid? That's too far. Alina, Mom started. No, I'm done. You made your choice years ago. I begged for your attention. I tried harder than anyone. I became something despite everything. And not once. Not once. Did you look at me the way you look at him even now, broken and broke and still the center of your world? I looked at Ethan. He didn't say anything. Just closed his eyes, ashamed, or maybe too drugged to care. And then I turned and walked out. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't cry in the parking garage. I didn't even cry during the long drive home. But when I got back to my bakery, to the warm smell of bread and the quiet hum of safety, I walked into the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and let myself sob. Not for them, for the girl I used to be, the girl who kept hoping they'd finally choose her. That girl died that night, and I buried her with flour on my hands and fire in my chest. The morning after I walked out of that hospital, I didn't open the bakery, I didn't turn on the lights, I didn't roll out dough, I didn't write my daily quote on the chalkboard that hung near the front counter. Instead, I sat at the little round table by the window, watching the sun crawl across the hardwood floor like it had every day for 3 years. Only this time I noticed how quiet everything was. No humming mixer, no chatter of regulars, no distant voice of my mother echoing in my head, reminding me to be grateful, even when being crushed. The silence was almost holy. I reached for my phone and deleted our family group chat, or what used to be one. It had turned into a one-way announcement board for Ethan's business schemes, vacation photos from my parents, and the occasional happy birthday text sent 2 days late. I didn't even flinch when it disappeared. Then I scrolled through my contacts. Mom. Delete. Dad. Delete. Ethan. I paused. Then deleted him too. I didn't owe them a thing. I brewed myself a cup of coffee and poured it into the mug Clara had made me for my birthday. She was my assistant, younger, full of spark, and fierce in a way I admired. The mug had tiny painted croissants dancing around the rim, and the words, Boss Babe Bakery Queen, written in gold across the front. It had made me laugh when she gave it to me. It made me tear up now, because she saw me. Later that day, Clara came by. She looked surprised when she found me sitting in the dark, still in my pajamas with flour on my cheek and dried coffee in my mug. Alina? Hey, I said, voice hoarse. You okay? No, but I will be. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me, tucked her legs under her, and said, "Want to talk about it?" And so I did. Everything. The favoritism, the guilt, the way I had trained myself to always be helpful, always be quiet, always be the one who said sorry first. I told her about Ethan's schemes, how he'd borrowed money from my first business and never paid it back, how he twisted stories so I always looked like the bitter sister, how my parents defended him with a blind faith I used to envy. I used to think I had to earn their love. I whispered. "You don't," she said softly. "You never did." That night I slept for 11 hours straight, and the next morning I made scones, buttery, soft, with orange zest and cranberry. Clara walked in, smelled them, and smiled. "You're back." I wasn't, not fully, but I was returning to myself, and that was enough. I started going to therapy again. I told the truth in that little office with the dusty fern by the window. I cried, but I also laughed at the absurdity of it all. How long I'd clung to breadcrumbs and called it a feast. My therapist, Karen, gave me the tools I needed to recognize the cycle I'd been trapped in. "It's okay to mourn the family you wanted," she said, "even while you build the life you deserve." I needed to hear that. I started journaling. Not the fluffy Dear Diary stuff, but deep, gritty entries. I wrote letters I never intended to send, to Ethan. "You were my first best friend, then my first betrayal." To Mom. "You always said I was the strong one. That's just code for, you're not allowed to fall apart." To Dad. "You taught me that silence can be louder than any insult." It was liberating. Meanwhile, the bakery bloomed. We introduced new pastries, partnered with local coffee roasters. I let Clara take over our Instagram and she turned it into a whimsical haven. Daily reels, behind-the-scenes moments, stories of our journey. People started showing up in droves. Tourists came because they had seen a clip online. Locals brought their kids. Even an elderly woman named Joy came in every Saturday just to feel the good energy. I poured myself into the work, not to escape, but to create. And yet, the silence from my family remained. No calls. No texts. No letters. But strangely, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. I had chosen myself. One day, I found a box in storage. It was filled with old family photos, birthday parties, school recitals, beach vacations. Ethan was in almost every photo, front and center, arms around both of our parents. I was often in the background, off to the side, holding the camera, or cropped out entirely. I used to cry over these photos. Now, I closed the box and labeled it clearly, the past, for reference, not residency. There's a difference between remembering and reliving, and I was done reliving. I started connecting with people who saw me as more than a shadow. Clara, my therapist, a new friend named Danny who owned the bookstore down the street. We'd share wine on Friday nights and talk about healing, boundaries, and the kind of families we build. The kind you choose, not inherit. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was something more powerful. It was withdrawal with dignity. And it was just the beginning. Healing didn't make me soft. It made me strategic. Once the fog of grief began to lift, the grief of losing the illusion of a loving family, I started thinking differently. My energy wasn't consumed by sadness anymore. It was available for something else now. Clarity, purpose, and power. One morning, while organizing the bakery's monthly invoices, I came across an old email Ethan had sent nearly 2 years ago. Back when he had asked me to invest in his crypto startup idea, promising I'd triple my return in 6 months. It hadn't even taken 3 for the company to vanish, and for him to go radio silent. The email was full of arrogant charm. "Alina, this is your golden opportunity to get in early before it blows up. Trust me. You'll thank me later." I never did. But now, reading it again, I saw something else. Something I had missed. Attached was a PDF business proposal, and at the bottom of the file I noticed an address. A storage unit rental listed as the business's product warehouse. That was odd. Ethan's crypto scheme didn't need physical storage. Why list a unit? Curiosity buzzed through me. I looked up the address online. Still active, still under Ethan's name. That night, I drove out there, not with revenge in mind, but for answers. When I arrived, the place was dimly lit, the kind of facility with long rows of corrugated metal doors and security cameras perched like vultures. I had no key, but I watched from a distance. After 30 minutes, a familiar car pulled up. It was Dad's old Toyota, the one Ethan had taken temporarily 2 years ago. And out came Ethan. He unlocked Unit 144 and began dragging out black tubs full of what looked like electronics, modems, routers, even boxes with old refurbished phones. It wasn't just crypto he had been peddling. He was running some kind of black market electronics scam. I filmed it all, not sneakily, but clearly. I made sure my phone picked up his face, the contents of the unit, even his license plate. When he left, I stayed parked for another hour, heart pounding, mind racing. He had no idea I'd seen everything. Back home, I began to piece the rest together. Ethan wasn't just struggling, he was lying, laundering and stealing, and from people like me, from strangers, maybe even from our own parents. I reached out to an old friend from college, Mira, who had gone on to become a financial investigator. She owed me a favor from back in the day, and after a quick chat, she agreed to help me dig a little deeper, strictly off record for now. Within a week, Mira had connected the dots I couldn't. "Alina," she said over coffee at the bakery, "your brother's been receiving wire transfers from 3 different shell companies. They're laundering money, and if I were you, I'd stay far away. Unless what? Unless you want to expose him. Properly. Publicly. Legally." I didn't hesitate. "I do." Mira smiled. "Good. But you'll need a plan." So, we built one. I gathered every record, every email, every invoice, every fake contract Ethan had ever sent me. I found bank transfers, message threads, and even recorded a voicemail he had left me years ago, telling me not to worry about paperwork because we're family. He didn't know he was leaving breadcrumbs, but I picked up everyone. At the same time, I upgraded the bakery, not just with decor, but with branding. Clara and I worked tirelessly to rebrand the shop as Alina's Rise. It wasn't just a name, it was a declaration. I partnered with women-owned businesses, launched a monthly mentorship for young female entrepreneurs, and began sharing my story publicly, not with names, but with truth. People listened. The bakery became more than a shop. It became a community, and that's when the local paper reached out. They wanted to do a feature, From Betrayal to Business, How One Woman Turned Pain into Purpose. I said yes. The story ran on a Thursday. The photo showed me smiling gently in front of the bakery, holding a tray of pastries, with the quote underneath, "When people show you who they are, believe them. Then show them who you are and rise anyway." By Saturday, we had a line out the door, but the real impact came the following week when I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, "Cease and desist from Ethan." He claimed I was defaming him, that I was spreading lies, that if I didn't stop, he would sue. I laughed, because he didn't know what I had. So I responded not with fear, but with facts. I emailed him back directly, for the first time in months. Subject, your letter body. "Hi Ethan, thank you for your letter. I've shared it with my legal counsel. I assume your concern stems from the article, though no names were mentioned. However, should you choose to pursue legal action, please be aware that I have documented evidence of the following: your use of my initial $12,000 investment for a fake crypto scheme, your operation of shell companies as recently as last month, your storage unit contents, now on video financial transfers under your name that have been reported to federal investigators. If this escalates, I will not hesitate to testify. Sincerely, Alina." He didn't respond, but he did stop. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in the man who used to mock my strength. It was quiet revenge, legal, documented, empowered, and it wasn't over yet. By the time the Chamber of Commerce Awards Gala came around in early November, The air in town had already begun to shift. Word about what happened between me and Grant had started circulating, not through my lips, but through the quiet whispers of old clients, newer allies, and a few disillusioned employees who had once worked under his thumb. The most ironic part? Grant was still completely unaware of how far the rot had spread beneath his glittering shoes. He was up for the Entrepreneur of the Year award, hosted in our city's historic theater. It was the kind of event our town took seriously. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in sweeping gowns, local news crews, champagne flowing like rivers of denial. I had avoided these functions for years, especially after I left the company, but this time I was invited as a finalist for what? Community Impact Award. It was almost laughable. The girl they once said wasn't cutthroat enough. The assistant they told to stay in her lane. Now I was being honored for the small business incubator I'd started, a haven for women-run startups trying to break into tech, baking and creative industries alike. That night, as I stepped out of the car in a deep navy blue velvet dress, no date on my arm, just dignity in my stride, I felt the air tighten, the kind of hush that spreads when a ghost from the past walks into the room alive and glowing. People stared. Some smiled warmly. Others shifted in their tuxes, uncomfortable. Grant was inside, of course, at the front table with his new PR girlfriend, the one he'd brought in to clean up his image after his third HR complaint. He looked good, glossy. But behind the confident posture was something I'd always known how to spot: fear in a tailored mask. When our eyes met from across the ballroom, I smiled. Not cruelly, but like someone who had already let go of needing anything from him. That shook him more than any glare ever could. The ceremony began with a flourish. Lights, music, applause. Speeches that blurred together. And then came his turn. Grant was called up to accept his award. As he walked up the steps, applause rang out. But something was off. Not everyone clapped. A table of women, I recognized one from the HR department he'd once berated into quitting, sat still. Another group of young professionals whispered. Even the host, a longtime friend of Grant's, paused awkwardly before reading his bio. When Grant began his speech, it was the usual storm of buzzwords: vision, resilience, leadership. But halfway through, a microphone crackled from the back of the room, and then my voice played. It wasn't me in real time. It was a recording, a clip from the podcast interview I had done 2 weeks earlier, the one I'd been hesitant to release. In it, I spoke plainly. They told me I was too sensitive to lead, that I needed to smile more and speak less. But behind closed doors, those same men stole my ideas, passed them off as theirs, and expected me to clean up the mess after their tantrums. The ballroom fell silent. Grant froze at the podium. The clip continued, echoing through the grand walls. And the worst part? When I finally walked away, they thought I'd disappear quietly, but I didn't. I rebuilt. I helped others do the same, and now they're asking why the women they ignored are suddenly at the top. Applause broke out. Not everyone clapped, but enough did. And then the lights dimmed. A slideshow appeared behind him, not planned by the committee. It had been uploaded as a last-minute slide deck by a young event organizer I had mentored. The slides displayed screenshots, internal emails, anonymous quotes, verified stats all sourced, all accurate, nothing illegal, just the truth. How Grant's leadership had led to a 40% turnover rate in under a year. How his mentorship program had funneled PR credit to his name while others did the work. How dozens of women left the company in silence while he climbed over their exhaustion. No slander. No lies, just receipts. He turned around, horrified. The host stammered, Mr. Kensington, would you like to address this? Or he bolted. Literally walked off stage and out the side door. No words. No bravado. Just silence and the echo of heels leaving behind a legacy built on exploitation. I remained seated. I hadn't orchestrated the clip, the slide, or the well-timed broadcast. Not directly. I hadn't needed to. The people I helped had done it. The women who found jobs through my co-op. The ones who finally got funding. The assistants who stopped being invisible. That was the real revenge. Building something so strong it exposed the weakness in everything he once used to control. When they called my name for the Community Impact Award, I didn't cry. I just stood, walked to the stage, and said, "This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every woman who was told she wasn't enough. It belongs to the silence we shattered. And it belongs to the future we are finally allowed to design." Standing ovation. No fireworks, just justice. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the girl who had to prove herself. I felt like the woman who never had to again. The days after Ethan's exposure felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Quiet, surreal, but with the unmistakable sense that destruction had already taken place, and everyone was just beginning to realize it. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was preparing cinnamon glaze for a wedding cake, my mind blissfully lost in the simple rhythm of my work. Ronnie poked her head into the kitchen, her face pale. "It's your mom," she said softly. "She's outside," I paused. "Outside? She looks upset." I wiped my hands, heart thudding against my ribs like a warning bell. I hadn't seen my mother in person since the night of the fundraiser. Since I'd walked away without looking back. Since she'd watched Ethan crumble and still couldn't say a single word in my defense. She stood just outside the front door of the bakery, arms folded tightly, sunglasses covering her eyes. A woman who once ruled every room she walked into now looked like someone searching for a way to enter a world she'd been locked out of. "I came to talk," she said. Voice low, I leaned against the doorframe. I figured. There was a long pause. Then she spoke again. Carefully, like someone learning a new language. "We didn't know everything about what he was doing." I nodded slowly. "But you suspected. You always did. You just didn't want to see it." Her face twitched. "He's my son. And I'm your daughter." That landed. I could see the sharp inhale, the way her shoulders tensed, like she'd been waiting for that line her entire life, and dreading it. She looked away, blinking behind her glasses. "We failed you. Both of us," there it was. Not an apology, not really, but maybe the closest she'd ever get. "I know," I said simply. She looked up, startled by the softness in my voice, but I wasn't interested in screaming anymore. The storm had passed. Now all I wanted was peace. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. "I made lemon muffins." She hesitated, then nodded. Inside the bakery, she sat at a corner table, eyes moving slowly across the room. She looked at the photos on the walls. Snapshots of me with couples on their wedding days, customers holding cupcakes, kids with frosting mustaches. A whole life she had never asked about. "You built this," she murmured. "I did. It's beautiful." I didn't reply. I just slid a muffin across to her and sat down. We talked, awkwardly at first, then more freely. She asked about my work, about Ronnie, about my dog, Jasper. She didn't mention Ethan again, and I didn't press. Some silences were better left intact, but the fallout wasn't just between us. The company Ethan had worked for began unraveling once the audit results were made public. Misallocated funds, fake contracts, bribes. He hadn't just been skimming. He'd been running a whole side operation under their noses. And once the partners realized who had leaked the information, things escalated. I received a bouquet of white roses. No card. Then a handwritten note slid under the bakery door. "You think you won? Watch your back." Ronnie saw it first. She crumpled it up without a word and tossed it into the trash. "They're just trying to rattle you," she said. "Cowards always bark louder when they're cornered." Still, I couldn't shake the weight of it. Revenge had felt righteous in the beginning, like leveling the scales. But now, in the aftermath, it felt heavier than I expected. Ethan tried calling once more. I didn't answer. He sent a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, apologizing, explaining, blaming, apologizing again. I burned it in my backyard fire pit that night. Not because I hated him, but because I didn't need to carry his words anymore. That weekend, I drove to the lake. The same one where Dad used to take Ethan fishing, while I stayed home with Mom and helped fold laundry. It was peaceful now. The water still and silver under the late afternoon sun. I stood at the edge, shoes off, letting the mud squish between my toes. I thought about who I used to be. The girl who waited for love to be earned, The daughter who thought being quiet meant being safe. The sister who believed loyalty would be enough. She was gone. And in her place stood a woman who baked her own happiness from scratch. Who chose boundaries over begging. Who had learned that sometimes the only way to heal was to stop hoping others would change, and change yourself instead. I watched as a bird skimmed the lake surface and disappeared into the trees. Then I turned back to the car. There was still a long road ahead, but I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. I had finally learned to hear my own voice in it. I never expected that silence could be so loud. After the confrontation, after the tears and slamming doors, the house felt like a void. My parents didn't call. My brother, of course, went dark, probably licking his wounds in some cozy hideout he could still afford, thanks to my parents' endless support. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the eerie calm before something else, something I couldn't name. I walked around my apartment barefoot, brushing my fingers over old photographs I hadn't touched in years. One was of me at 10 years old, proudly holding up a certificate for placing first in my grade. I remembered Dad's lukewarm pat on the back and Mom saying, "Imagine if your brother applied himself like you do. He'd be unstoppable." Yet they never held him to the same standard. They never even tried. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had never been the problem. I had just been the mirror, a reflection of everything they refused to face in themselves. They didn't hate me. They hated their own failure to love fairly. And now, they had to live in that truth. A week passed. Then 2. I kept waiting for a knock, a text, a phone call. None came. Not even a passive-aggressive Facebook message from Mom. That was the most telling silence of all. So I filled the space with things that mattered. I repotted my dying plants. I started attending a yoga class every Thursday. I even began tutoring a neighbor's daughter in photography after school. I poured myself into small healing actions. They didn't erase the pain, but they anchored me to something steadier than resentment. One evening, as golden light spilled across my living room, I found myself humming. Not loudly, just enough to feel my own presence in the space. It felt unfamiliar. It felt good. Until the letter arrived. It was from my mother, handwritten. That alone made me pause. She hadn't handwritten anything to me since I was 16 and grounded for staying out late. Her words were stiff, like someone trying to sound soft without knowing how. She said they were surprised by how things had turned out. She admitted they were hurt by the things I said. She didn't apologize, but she mentioned that my brother had moved out and hadn't spoken to them since. Then she asked, "Could we talk?" I sat with the letter for 3 days, and then I wrote back, "Dear Mom, I received your letter. Thank you for sending it. I appreciate the gesture. At this time, I am focusing on my emotional well-being and rebuilding trust in myself. I need space and clarity, and I hope you can respect that. I wish you healing, Alina." I didn't send it to hurt her. I sent it because I had nothing left to give them that wasn't already taken. Weeks became months. The holiday season came and went. For the first time, I spent it with friends instead of family. There was laughter, mismatched ornaments, overcooked stuffing, and inside jokes that made my cheeks hurt. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. In early spring, I received a message from someone I hadn't thought about in years. Aunt Sheila. She was my dad's estranged sister, a woman they rarely spoke of, and whom I met only once at a family reunion when I was 11. Her message was kind, full of warmth. She said she'd heard about what had happened. She didn't pry, just said, "You deserved better. If you ever need an aunt, I'm here." I cried for an hour after reading it, not because I was sad, but because someone saw me. I decided to meet her for lunch. She looked older than I remembered, but held herself like someone who'd been through her own wars and survived. We talked for 3 hours. She told me stories about my dad that made me laugh and ache at the same time. She said, "Your father always resented how easily I walked away from the family mess. Maybe that's why he stayed so long in it." I asked her if she regretted it. She shook her head. "Not once. Sometimes peace is worth more than loyalty." That line stayed with me. Because for years I'd mistaken loyalty for love. I thought staying, forgiving, shrinking myself was how you earned a place in a family. But now I knew better. Peace was not something they could give me. It was something I had to choose, and I chose it. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped wondering if they ever talked about me, if they felt guilt, if they missed me. That wasn't my job anymore. My job was to live, so I did. I grew my photography business. I started hosting small exhibitions. I traveled with friends, took a solo trip to Scotland, watched the northern lights dance above my head, and felt something inside me soften. One evening, I found myself on the beach, camera in hand, watching a little girl build a crooked sandcastle while her mother looked on with patient joy. The wind tangled my hair, and I realized I hadn't thought about my family in weeks. Not because I didn't care, but because they no longer controlled my weather. And in that moment, as I clicked the shutter and captured the fleeting beauty of an imperfect tower of sand, I whispered to myself, "You made it." The quiet in my apartment was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful now. The kind of silence that doesn't scream abandonment, but instead whispers healing. I lit a lavender candle, something I used to do often before things fell apart, and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city moved on outside, unaware of the storm that had finally settled inside me. After everything, the betrayal, the favoritism, the years of being treated like the spare daughter, I had finally stepped into my own light. I didn't need their approval. I didn't crave their apologies anymore. My worth had never depended on their recognition. That realization wasn't just freeing, it was transformative. I had learned to create my own rituals. I planted lavender in my small balcony garden. I painted again. I smiled more. Not the forced, don't worry about me smile, but real ones. Ones that reached my eyes and softened the lines around my mouth. My therapist called it reclaiming my identity. I just called it becoming myself again. The lawsuit had settled in my favor a few weeks ago. It wasn't about the money, though the money helped me finally move out of that shared apartment and into my own place. It was about boundaries, about forcing them, my parents, my brother, to acknowledge, even if legally, that what they did had consequences. They had crossed a line, and I had drawn it back in blood-red ink. I thought winning the case would give me satisfaction, but the truth was it only gave me space. Space to breathe, space to let go, and that was what I really needed. Justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's just about being seen. My brother hadn't reached out since the court date. I had received exactly one text from my mother. It read, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed your brother's future." No apology, no reflection, just blame. Classic. But this time, I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't rage. I simply stared at it, then blocked her number. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. I was done bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand me a bandage. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. My new job at the community center wasn't glamorous, but it was soul-fulfilling. I helped young girls navigate identity, boundaries, family expectations. I saw parts of myself in them. The confusion, the hunger for approval, the quiet suffering. And I taught them what I had learned the hardest way possible. You can love someone and still walk away from them. That is not betrayal. That is survival. I painted a mural in the center's hallway. It was a tree, one trunk, but with branches reaching in different directions. Some were broken, some blooming, some barely starting. Underneath it, I wrote, "You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become after." The staff loved it. The girls asked to add their own fingerprints in different colors to the branches. Each print told a story: pain, triumph, hope. It became a living, breathing testament to resilience. I found joy in little things. Morning walks, quiet bookstores, strawberry ice cream at the pier. My world, once muted and shaped by others, had become my own again. Vivid, intentionally crafted. Authentically me. One afternoon, as I sipped my coffee on a park bench, I saw a young woman arguing with someone on the phone. Her voice cracked. Something about her mom not listening, not believing her. I caught her eyes for a split second. That moment, her shame, her hurt, I recognized it. I didn't say anything. I just offered a smile, a kind that said, "I see you." Sometimes that's all we need. I had stopped needing closure from my family. That was the real twist in my story. They never gave me peace. I found it myself. Not through revenge, but through reclamation. And then, weeks later, something unexpected happened. A letter came in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it cautiously. Alina, you probably don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. I've watched everything unfold, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I see now what I didn't see back then, how they favored me, how they dismissed you. I didn't want to admit it because it benefited me, but that wasn't fair. Not to you. I've lost everything. The job, the respect, even their trust after the trial. But maybe I deserve to. I hope you find what you're looking for in life. I'm sorry I wasn't the brother you needed. Aaron. I sat with the letter for a long time. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel warm. But I did feel calm, like maybe the past didn't need to be a wound anymore. Maybe it could just be a scar, one that faded with time. I never replied. I didn't need to. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's for you, so you can lay down the weight and walk forward. And that's what I did. I still don't know if my parents will ever change, but I stopped hoping. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Some people don't change, but you can. I changed. I became a woman who no longer whispers when she should speak, who no longer shrinks to make others comfortable, who knows that love without respect is just manipulation with sugar on top. I started writing again. Stories, essays, sometimes just long journal entries. One of them got picked up by a local blog, then another. I'm not famous, I'm not viral, but I'm heard. And after years of being invisible, that's everything. Tonight, as I type this, I hear rain against the window. It used to make me feel lonely. Now it feels like music. I don't need a perfect family. I just need peace. And I found it. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most powerful revenge is building a life they can no longer poison.